Computer clock this. As soon as the lady talks, then we can begin our meeting. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this regular meeting of the Cowlitz County Board of Commissioners. We're glad to have you today. We'll start off with a Pledge of Allegiance, a review of our minutes, consent agenda. We have a call for hearings, some bids, 3 motion items, and a bid opening at 11 o'clock. So if you're able to, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, Commissioner Dahl.
Good morning.
Morning.
I've reviewed the minutes from the previous week's meeting and found everything satisfactory. I would move to approve.
All right, the motion is to approve the minutes from last week's meetings. Are there any additions, questions, or concerns? All right, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
I also vote aye. That motion does carry. On today's consent agenda, we have a call for a hearing for final approval for the proposed urban subdivision of Silver Lake Village number 3. The next item is a call for bids, a request for qualifications, in which we request statements of qualifications for experienced professional planning consulting services for geotechnical services or peer review of geotechnical assessments. So this gets us all in order for making sure we have the proper authorities and experts approving various proposals, oftentimes dealing with development that affects wetlands and other risky slope areas. So we have to have special experts to part of the review process. So we call for those bids. The second item is a decision to reject all bids that we've received for the polyethylene geomembranes for the landfill. We only got 1 bid and it was unacceptably high. And so we're going to go through the process again. Sometimes it's a matter of timing and we don't get very many bids. And if it's out of line, we try again. There may be more businesses available to do the work and provide the program. So we'll go through that again later this month. We also have a bid award for approval for the battery power solutions. That's we talked about that in the last couple of weeks. It's for the replacement of the uninterruptible power supply system batteries over at the Hall of Justice. Make sure they don't get blanked out. And those batteries needed to be replaced. Just shy of $31,000. We have an amended agreement number 1 approval for the emergency support shelters to add $50,000 for supporting shelter operations for individuals fleeing violence and abuse. We also have an agreement to amendment number 1 for the approval with Herrera Environmental Consultants for engineering consultant services. That's for an amount not to exceed $150,000. Those consultants are paid for by the applicants who are asking to do development within Cowlitz County. Completion letter, next is a completion letter for a project with Columbia River Contractors. Actually, it's a unit price established for the year for our guardrail installation and repairs. And contract change order number 1 with Pacific Tech Construction, and that's finishing up a project with the Sheriff's Office, the construction of some transaction windows they discovered after making the improvements and moving equipment. The electrical service just wasn't enough to operate the new equipment, so we had to pay for a new one. That was an unanticipated need. So it raised the increase to added about $1,100 to the original adjustment. Last but not least, we received another notice from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, issuing a certificate of completion for spillway gate operation out at Yale Dam. And then we did receive a notice from our county auditor that last week she paid vouchers totaling just shy of $1 million. That included 3 special purpose districts. Any items need to be, have any questions for? All right. We have 23 attendees online. Check to see if any folks want to make comments. Not yet. All right. So, oh, yes, sir.
I was going to say there's like an echo out here.
Yeah, there is an echo out there.
Okay.
Volume, the volume.
Sounds like it does sound like it's coming from my computer.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yes.
Morning.
Good morning. I just got a quick question on item number 6. The wording, the total is not to exceed by $150,000, the increase? Is that what that is?
So this is an amendment number 1. So we already have an agreement,
Right?
which was originally for, I'm doing quick math.
It was originally 250.
Yeah, originally. So we anticipate a larger project that's going to require some additional consulting work. So we've just extended it up to, the total amount is not to exceed 400,000. I didn't really explain it correctly.
Okay, so the $150,000 number on here is just an increase.
Right.
Right? Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought. Thank you.
Sorry. Anyone else? Good morning.
Morning. On your website, you list your agenda. On your PDF, it's the same as the agenda on your website. And I noticed the discrepancies in this agenda that you had over here. I'm wondering why aren't the items on the agenda listed specifically like they were for March 7th?
And I think we got the wrong page added for that. That was available. It was a clerk's error.
You put the wrong page on your agenda on your website?
Yeah, it was changed for the latest online version. We didn't catch that.
It's sure getting tough in this county to get records.
Anyone else? All right, I would entertain a motion then to accept the consent agenda.
I would move to accept the consent agenda as presented, plus the voucher and warrants in the amount of $995,082.29.
Any further comments? Right, we're now up to 25 listening in. No hands raised. Okay, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
I also vote aye. That agenda is approved. That brings us to a request from Public Works. A resolution fixing the weight restrictions on county-owned bridges pursuant to state law. The load rating analysis identified certain county-owned bridges that are required to have weight limits, weight limit restrictions for at least the next 10 years. We workshopped that yesterday. We had some pretty large vehicles with 5, 6, 7 axles that had to have the weight restriction placed on them for the bridges at any rate. I believe our county engineer is online. If anybody has any questions Or Susan, actually, if you want to just share with the audience the bridges, that would work. She's there. She is.
Of course.
Yes.
Good morning, Commissioner. Susan Eugenius, County Engineer. So the bridges that are getting additional load ratings added to them are Abernathy Creek Bridge number 2, Harmony Drive Bridge number 1, Oakham Road Bridge, Ostrander Bridge number 1, and Slide Creek Road Bridge number 1. All of these weight restrictions are for single unit vehicles with 6 or 7 axles, or emergency vehicles with 2 or 3 axles.
All right. So this, we're coming to the end of the first 10 years, or was that a brand new state law adding the restrictions?
So the single unit vehicles was a newer state law approximately 6 years ago, and this is the second half of our bridges that we finished the load rating on. These were further out from the state highway, and so these were done in the second round. And it was because the configurations of the trucks have changed. We have more vehicles with more axles carrying heavier loads. So we've added these new classifications of vehicles in the past 10 years.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, I walk in and it's truck driving stuff. That's what I like to see. So just out of curiosity, you guys are aware of the bridge formula for trucks, right?
Right, on the tip of my,
Have you heard of the bridge formula? No. Okay. You know, you can have a truck with a certain amount of axles. They carry this much weight. Add axles, you add more weight, but it's got to be balanced on the load, right? You can't have this axle be over a certain amount of weight. I wish I brought my book with me because it's a little bit complicated working out the bridge formula. But when you load your truck, you weigh your axles and then you work out your bridge formula so you know that you're not over on one part of your truck. That load has to be balanced. So you can say, I've got a load here that's 80,000 pounds on, let me see, 6 axles. But you can do 105 with adding 3 more axles. But the formula, the weight going over the bridge is still within parameters. I was just curious if you guys know about the bridge formula. Do you know about that one, Susan?
So we have consultants do this, and it's all based on the load per axle and different stresses and strains depending on if it's what type of bridge it is that they analyze them on.
okay, thank you. I learned something today. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. I would entertain a motion to approve the resolution.
I move to approve resolution approval for fixing weight restrictions on Cowlitz owned bridges pursuant to RCW 36.75.270. This is for a period of 10 years.
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
I also vote aye. That motion does carry. Next, we have a request from our Building and Planning Department. There are certain land use approvals that we refer to an expert. We call them a hearings examiner. Under our state, our county policy, they must be a lawyer, and they conduct special hearings and make recommendations, oftentimes creating special use conditions to allow a development to go forward based on public testimony and the best available science that's available, those kinds of things. We had a request for qualifications and reviewed the applicants, and the recommendation from the department is to continue with Mr. Scheibmeir, who's been our hearings examiner for quite some time. During that approval discussion, the board did talk with the department about the importance of making sure the rules and procedures do encourage participation from the public. And we've talked about expanding the amount of signs to notify the public. when there's a land use issue being made. Previously, the signs were on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper that you can't read when you drive by. So a lot of people aren't aware something's going on. So they're working on regulations to expand that, to make it much more visible, to make more information available to the public. So their recommendation is that we do appoint Mr. Scheibmeir again. Any questions, comments? All right, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve Mr. Scheibmeir to be our hearings examiner.
I would move to approve Mark Scheibmeir to serve as Cowlitz County Hearing Examiner. Total cost is not to exceed 20,000 per year.
My comment on that is that for hearings examiners, the applicant does pay for the costs that he bills. So any other questions or comments? No hands raised. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? I also vote aye. That motion does carry. Next, we have a bid award for a project in the Juvenile Department. Accurate Electric Unlimited has been our contractor installing a security system support repair. They do preventive maintenance on that program. The total amount for the first year is not to exceed a little over $14,500. And it goes up to about 14.8 next year. A little over 15 in 2025 and just shy of 15.5 in 2026. Any questions on that? We have representatives from the Youth Services Department to answer questions if you have any. Right, seeing no hands raised, I would entertain a motion to approve the bid award.
I move to approve the bid award to Accurate Electric Unlimited for our security system support, repair, and quarterly preventative maintenance services at our Cowlitz County Juvenile Detention Center in amounts as listed.
Any further discussion? All right. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
I also vote aye. That motion does carry. That concludes our printed items for today, other than the 11 o'clock bid award openings. Now it's time for citizen comment. They were here for the juvenile thing in case there were questions, so. So you were here a few weeks ago looking for public records. Were you ever able to get a hold of them? Because we've been working with the auditor and they've said they are absolutely available.
Well, the auditor says one thing and reality is a second thing. And I got the same response when last week, 2 weeks now, when I went up to the city that's a tribute to Murphy's Law, because my meeting was right next to the state archives.
Mm-hmm.
They're in some warehouse somewhere. Second response on that. So I've pretty much given up trying to find any records. Just like the switch today on your agenda, your PDF file and your standard agenda were both one and the same, and they had no itemized lists of what you were going to discuss today, which is why I'm here today. And I believe, Commissioner Weber, you just said it was the wrong page you put on your website, correct? Is that correct?
That's what I was told.
You were told who updated the website?
It's a program that we have, is Agenda Quick, and it updates the website.
Apparently it didn't update this week. Is that correct?
I show that it's on there.
Well, it wasn't on there last night because I have two paper copies and they're both, your general agenda and your PDF download file are both one and the same, and they don't list any specifics like your agenda you're handing out today on this table. Another, can't get records. That's not what I'm here for. One of my friends who has access to your, whoever televises whatever, cable television, I believe it's KLTV that broadcasts. He told me about, the broadcast on March 7th. And I believe you were speaking, Mr. Weber, and it had to do with mental health and where you were going to get the funds. And lo and behold, he told me that, oh, we're going back to the auditor's records again. And you specifically stated, well, maybe we can get some funds for mental health from the auditor's records again. And he had his IT device and he showed me that you actually said, well, maybe we can get some funds from the auditor's records. Well, I don't know what's going to happen this year up in that city that's a tribute to Murphy's Law. Are the county commissioners actively, what's the word, lobbying to prevent this other $100 extra that the legislature seems to want to add on top of your $205, and it'll make it $305. Are you either commissioners, Mortensen, Weber, or Dahl, are you lobbying against this?
What they call it WASAC, which is the lobbying arm for counties, is against it. Yeah. Have I personally gone up and done it? No. Has the organization? Yeah.
Have you, Mr. Weber?
No.
Of course, we can't ask Mr. Mortensen on that subject. And I believe on that same date, when you had your open public meeting, you had a resolution supporting the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. And there is a bill that was passed by the House that they're going to ban a so-called weapon, which nobody's ever given a specific definition. Oh, they call it an assault weapon. Well, there are certain requirements to have that, but that's passing. It passed the House, and I didn't hear Senator Wilson when he had his town hall. I heard, or my friend showed me some of his testimony, and he was against the bill in the Senate. But I hear our grand and glorious governor and our attorney general are for it. My question is, that resolution you passed, does it have the force of law?
Resolutions don't have the force of law.
I know, because I've been voting on them every general election, advisory votes. These do not have force of law. So what's the point of passing a resolution if it doesn't have the force of law? You're going to be overruled by a state legislature and possibly a court, which is happening down in Oregon, thank God. They have to take their ban, and it's going through the Oregon courts now, which is probably where this bill is headed. And it's going to cost the advocates in the state millions of dollars for a law that's been on the books for over 200 years. So what was the point of passing that resolution if it didn't have the force of law?
Well, I think you have to stand and give your opinion on what you think, and you know, if enough people start standing, then hopefully some of these people start listening, but you have to stand on your principle. I mean, we can take a stance and not enforce those laws in Cowlitz County, you know, but that's not everybody's willing to do that. But I think when you present those type of things, at least I'm telling you, I'm willing to stand. I'll stand there and tell them that we're not going to do that in this county. And if it has personal consequences that come to me, then I'll deal with them. But you have to stand at some point in time. And I think it's important to do that.
That stance was already taken over 200 years ago. And
It's
it's,
forgotten by a lot of our leaders.
well, if they forget, then the persons who wrote it considered it the last resort of a republic form of government. And if these people can't understand, shall not be infringed. And they pass the law and they're the legislative body. And then we come to that point. Do we obey the law or don't we?
Thank you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Since we have a little bit of time and we have a history teacher amongst us,
Oh,
I've heard, I just saw a recent letter, something about it might be a good idea to consider a charter form of government for the county. Maybe Dennis, you could give us kind of some background information on that.
I thank you for asking. The system of county government that Cowlitz County operates under was designed back in the mid 1800s when the county commissioners were road commissioners and responsible for road repair in the various districts that they represent. The state did approve an amendment to the Constitution quite a few years ago, allowing an upgrade to this county government through a freeholders process. Now, freeholder is an old-fashioned term from medieval England about independent landowners getting together to organize governments. And so the idea is to elect a group of citizens to meet and design their own form of government, theoretically more modern style. And so there are very few restrictions on what the government, this new form of government can change. One of them being our prosecuting attorney has to be an elected official. The judges have to be elected officials. But everything else about county government can be changed, whether we have 100 elected officials or we restrict it to a council, or having an appointed executive or an elected executive, or not even having an executive. It's really whatever the group of people want in order to, kind of modernize the style of government to 21st century standards. Ultimately, it is referred to a vote of the people. So bottom line is the people elect the freeholders, the people get a chance to vote on the freeholders' recommendations, up or down. That's been tried twice in Cowlitz County. Once back in the 1970s, I believe, and the people said no. Once in the late 90s, and the people said no. So pretty strict standard, very difficult to get charters adopted. So the new form of government would be called a charter. And it supplants the state laws that regulate an awful lot of what we do here in Cowlitz County. We have to follow state law and state constitution. I mean, that's kind of basic, but how we get it done can be designed the way we want if the people so choose a charter.
What would be your recommendation?
Well, It turns out that I was on the Board of Freeholders in the late 1990s, and we designed a charter that was filled with all kinds of rules and restrictions on the style of government. We made it mostly elected officials who were nonpartisan rather than partisan. And there was a provision for an elected 5-member county council, and an executive, I think, was appointed. I can't remember the details. It's been a while ago. It ended up being a very long, very wordy document. And ultimately, the longer the document is, the greater the opportunity for people to have questions and doubts. And when it came to a vote, they turned it down. So my recommendation now would be if the people have some very definite changes that they want. We've heard comments that the county system of government is broken. Other people say, wait a minute, we're all elected by the people. Is it really broken, or are we doing what the people want? And that argument goes back and forth. So I'm kind of ambivalent. If we get a request from citizens to go through a freeholder process, I'll certainly, support doing that, because I think ultimately people have a right to at least go through the process. And if it, every 20 years, I think Thomas Jefferson said we need a revolution about every 20 years. He was talking about the French Revolution. I'm talking about a much more peaceful transition to a different type of government. But if people are satisfied with the system that we have, then they should vote the charter down.
Well,
Ideally, if we do go through a freeholders, in 1997, there were 7 freeholders for each of the 3 districts. So we had a board of 21 people that worked on this for about 7 months. And the next year we submitted the charter to a vote of the people. So it's not a very long, drawn out process at all. That doesn't have to be anything.
do you see anything, since politics there's been so many changes in the last few years, you guys made recommendations back in the late 90s. Is there anything that you would see that should be changed from what you recommended back in the 90s?
Well, I think if you consider that Cowlitz County is a $260 million a year business, and we have 3 executives. Actually, we have about 10 executives, because all the other elected officials are executives. In the private sector, my understanding is that doesn't work very well. You need to have somebody in charge to make the decisions. I think we should seriously look at something like that, but we've tried it, and it hasn't worked out. So like I said, I'm a little ambivalent if the need is there, but certainly those who feel the system is broken need to rally around, run for freeholder and participate in that process.
Okay, thank you.
Rick, I don't know if you want to, if you have a comment on something like that. You've got more experience than I do in the private sector, so.
I'd have to, I haven't really delved into that, so.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just a personal observation then on our current forms of administration and government is that it seems to be working pretty well, except when our government entities take and claim emergency powers for extended periods of time, like our governor or like the city of Longview, and take it out of the hands of the citizens to have input.
In regards to the first gentleman's comments about the resolution you adopted about firearms, you guys do have the law behind you. You have the U.S. Constitution, and you have the Washington Constitution that specifically states we, the law-abiding citizens, have the right to bear arms, and you can tell the governor where to go with this bill. And if he doesn't like it, too bad, because you do have law behind you. Do have the law behind you, not just the resolution. And it's about time we stood up and said no to this clown in Olympia.
Thank you.
All right, now we get to talk about guns. I think the volume must be on here. We got echo going, but so anyway, I looked into this bill, or the House Bill 1240, which has passed the House now, is in the Senate. And if you read through the bill, I don't know if you guys have, but it's kind of like not very well written. I don't know where these guys went to school, but it's almost, sophomoric. So I did a deep dive on it. It's like, how much of a threat is mass shootings here in Washington? So in 12 years, there's been 10. And for a mass shooting, you got to have 4 or more. In none of these cases was the dreaded AR or an AK-47 used. Almost every single one of them, except one, it was pistols or shotguns. In the one case, a kid had a .22 and shot up a Macy's. That was in 2016. The thing to reach the goal, or to reach the threshold of mass shooting, you gotta have a 4 people or more. Well, in probably a third or more of these cases, the 4th person is the guy doing the shooting. Almost every case, these people were known to each other. And so it's like they paint this picture of this certain armaments being a threat, but they haven't proven to be a threat at all. I don't want to go too much on about state stuff because, we got our resolution, how this pans out in the future. Here's the thing about it, and Dennis, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this will go through some court, eventually, and it'll pass. Our state courts are going to pass it, and probably through the 9th Circuit, it'll get past that. But I feel like the composition of the Supreme Court at this point in time, it won't pass there. I guess that's all speculation, remains to be seen. But the downside of that court, walking it all through the courts, that costs us all a bunch of money, and they write these things and they got to get challenged in court over and over again. But we as taxpayers, we get to pay both sides of the argument because we got to pay the judges, we got to pay the prosecutor, Ferguson, and and it's just such a waste of money. Now, there's nothing we can do about that here in this committee. So, but I just wanted to give some FYI for people who may not know all the details. Last week, a speaker came on and he was talking about the gun stuff. He says, well, why don't we have howitzers, or why don't we have this or that? And I've thought about this this week. And the funny thing is, you can have those things. You can get an FFL, you can have whatever weapon you really want. I have seen in the past F-18 fighter jets for sale. So the premise of you can't have these things, you can have them. And so when do we start carrying guns in the building? I guess that was the one big thing. Because I usually don't carry any kind of firearm, but I might go buy one just to, drag it around. So anyway, mainly I just wanted to give an FYI. I want to say the guy last week when he was talking about we can't have these things, you actually can. And that's pretty much my full statement today.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate those comments. Anyone else? But, well, I'll tell you what, you haven't had a chance to speak today?
No.
Yeah. Why don't we let him get it and we'll get back to you. We'll have time.
Question for you.
Sure.
Is there 50 pallet houses or is there more?
Is there what?
50 pallet houses or more?
We haven't had the proposal before us.
Because
I understand there's 50 pallet homes. There are some other structures there for restrooms and showers.
oh, okay.
And some food prep areas.
Yeah, and I'm
50
sorry.
residences.
I'm sorry. I just have a real quick question about the $4.5 trillion that Biden got for infrastructure. That's taxes from us, and he's raising the taxes again. And my mom said, "Well,
actually,
that's how it goes."
It's actually worse than that because we don't collect that much money each year. We borrow it from the future. So it's your grandchildren who are going to be paying for it.
because Obama borrowed money from China. And so is that what we're doing? Is we're borrowing money from China?
Well,
And we're raising our taxes now?
you're asking for almost an economics lecture. China is involved because we buy so much from China. They've got a lot of American dollars. What are they going to do with those dollars? They invest them.
Oh,
One of the
okay.
safest investments is American government securities. So,
Okay, and then I just got a buddy, one of my former bosses' sons works security at the pallet houses, and I'm thinking, well, I guess that's good because it's, of course, you just said there's more taxes for us too, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, so, okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Mr. Dragish, sorry.
Charter, Charter County. I was a candidate for a freeholder. I didn't get elected, neither did my late father. And I remember you were the chair of the elected freeholders. There was a lot of pressure from the county officials at that time. They didn't want it. And the funny thing was it all came about by a commissioner in the 3rd district that was wanting to build roads using county forces, which he did, or the director of public works at that time did. And then the plans became public near his residence, and that was the reason for the push for the county charter. But he didn't get reelected in the 3rd district. And I believe at a meeting up in Castle Rock where you chaired, the county officials, the elected officials, auditor, assessor, treasurer, or not the treasurer, but the assessor and the auditor and the county treasurer that time all advocated against it. And that was the reason the county charter failed. But then the commissioner that was using public entities and funds, he didn't get reelected, and it all collapsed in that. And then that was the only time in modern times that I can remember, but you said there was another one probably in the 70s, which I'm not aware of. But they can work, but elected officials really don't like it, as the 90s event proved.
Yeah.
So that was my perspective as a candidate.
Well, the irony is in the 90s, all of the county elected administrative officials were either Democrats or Republicans. Now, most of them are nonpartisan. Kind of interesting that.
Yeah,
We ended up with nonpartisan elected officers and policymakers. I guess that makes sense to have a little bit more, there's probably a more partisan tone to.
having gone to school in Oregon where you have to declare your party, I look at the statements in the voters pamphlet, prefers Republican, prefers Democrat. Well, in my life, you had to state who you were. And if you didn't put that designation on your campaign paraphernalia, well, the PDC used to enforce it. Now they, we don't want to, did you have another witness? And the funny thing about that, Initiative 134 that set up the PDC was designated Linda Smith, who was a Republican.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for all you people that work and I try hard, but I'm just a little bit disabled, but Anyways, seen if I did my taxes on my house and it was like a certain amount, and then 5 years it boosted up to twice as much. And I'm thinking, why is it so much on just my house? And it doubled in 5 to 10 years. I think it's been 5 years.
So we have an elected county assessor who has a staff whose job it is to study the marketplace where property is bought and sold. And based on that information of how much properties cost now to buy, they determine the value of all the properties on which we base the property tax. So assuming you've not made any improvements to your house, if the taxes have doubled, it could be a number of things, but there's a possibility the value of your house is much more than it was when you paid for it. That's typically the case.
Oh, right.
But also, there are some voter approved either tax levies or bond issues that are paid for by increased taxes. So our state government limits the amount we can increase tax revenue from property taxes to no more than 1% of the previous year's amount, unless there's new construction.
I see.
But if a government wants to borrow money to build something and pay it off over time, that's called the bond issue. And schools are most famous for having bond issues because they either build new schools or improve new schools, things like that. You can also change the levy and a special levy. And oftentimes schools will do that as well if it's a matter of adding program. So those are some of the reasons why you might experience an increase in property taxes. So it is limited, and then each of the various government entities, from the state, the county, if you live in a city, if you live in school districts, port districts, PUDs, they all have the ability to levy a certain portion of the allowable property tax. And it's kind of a complicated problem.
Right.
So if you have any other questions, I know the assessor is more than willing to explain how that process goes out. But they basically have to make sure that your property is comparable to other properties that have been on sale recently to the best of their ability. And that determines the fair market value on which the taxes are levied.
Thank you, Dennis.
Right.
A couple weeks ago, you were saying that, in fact, it was on TV also, that the college fund, the $3.8 trillion that Biden got for the college fund. And it hasn't fell through yet, but it's going to, I reckon.
So you're referring to the money that he wants to refund college loans with?
Right.
Okay, yeah.
Which is $3.8 trillion. And in fact, if that comes from China, then even if it's 1% interest, I mean, that's like phenomenal amount every second, and I'm thinking, that's just your wag, roll, and drop, right?
Especially if you haven't gone to college, or if you have actually paid off your college loan, you feel a little bit taken advantage of.
But
if that happens,
like I say, it's supposed to be going on in the next couple weeks or something. We're supposed to initiate it in.
It's going through the courts. The judges have to make their determination whether or not Congress gave him the authority. Not surprisingly, he used emergency legislation to say.
Yeah. Well, then, okay, thank you so much.
All right. If you see me looking down and pushing buttons on my screen, I'm responding to the chats and the questions. So just trying to remember.
Hello, I'm speaking as a citizen, and I wondered if I could ask Gina James. I see her name up there. If I could ask her a question.
If she is available.
She is.
There she is. Good morning, Gina.
Hi,
We've
good
got
morning.
Somebody from the public who'd like to ask you a question.
Hi, Gina. I wondered if you have a report at all from the Pallet Homes Salvation Army people, if they've given you any update on how things are going, health and safety wise at the Pallet Homes?
I don't. I'd be happy to reach out. The city of Longview might have an update on that project, but I have not received anything, an update on that particular project.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? We have 30 people zooming in. I don't see any hands raised and nobody is approaching. Oh, yes, go ahead.
Throw this at you.
Sorry.
It must be age. You three county commissioners, you realize you have a direct relation to property taxes in Cowlitz County. You explained our assessor. Maybe you'd like to explain the Board of Equalization and who appoints the personnel.
Good, that's a good reminder. I mentioned earlier that the assessor comes up with a formula and determines what your property is worth on which the taxes are based. The commissioners, under state law, appoint a 3-person board called the Board of Equalization, that if you don't like the assessment and you can indicate where the assessors were wrong, use the incorrect data, that conditions may have changed in your neighborhood, this Board of Citizens can review that information and they can change that assessment. So that's another protection that citizens have, required under state law, of course. And they oftentimes, if you actually have a really good explanation of how the assessors got it wrong, you don't even have to go to the Board of Equalization. The assessor will make an adjustment. She has that discretion. But again, the state has this very precise prescription on how you determine the value. And so you have to make sure that they've got that formula wrong or misapplied the facts. And sometimes they're not aware of some conditions. So anyway, thank you. I mean, that is an important check that citizens have on the process.
And how many members are on the Board of Equalization and how long are their terms?
Those are details I'm not, we have it on I said 3, there might be 5, I can't remember, but. And typically they're about 4-year terms, but I think
They have 3-year terms starting in July, and it looks like there are 3 members with an alternate.
Okay. 3 members and an alternate.
And, I was asking, how long are their terms of office?
3 years.
3 years?
Yeah, she just mentioned 3 years. Yep.
And they're directly appointed by district, commissioner district, or is it a vote of all 3 commissioners?
I think it's just a vote of the 3 of us. I don't think it's one of those required by district. Yeah, it doesn't say. Yeah.
So you pick them at random, or do they have to go through a application process?
We go through an application process. Yes.
And what are the requirements?
They have to be a citizen eligible to vote. I think those are the minimum qualifications for.
That's the only qualification.
Right.
And typically we do, not every time, but typically we interview if we don't know them.
Yeah.
Spend some time with them.
Do the members have a usually a repeat appointment for several years?
Quite often, it's only a 3-year term, and there's kind of a hefty learning curve. There's a state-sponsored training course because they have to be familiar with that formula that is being used. So quite often we'll get somebody and they'll be interested in continuing on. Not always. One of the ones we appointed several years ago, appointed as an alternate, never went to the training, never went to any meetings. So, I mean, obviously that person was removed from the list. So if they don't participate, yeah, they don't stay on, but most of the people take the job very seriously. Quite often people who have real estate experience are going to be interested in that. And having knowledge of the real estate market is helpful. Probably don't want all of them to be realtors, but that, you want a broad level of experience for something like that.
Yeah. But just in the 3.5 months I've been here on most of our advisory committees, people tend to stay on them, want to get reappointed from what I've seen, but
The key point, they're appointed, not elected.
they're appointed. Yeah, absolutely.
That's all I have.
All right. Sure.
I guess whatever the formula is for taxes, I wanted to just make note that I've lived in the same location for over 40 years. And when things took a nosedive in 2008, seems like we were several years behind that. And all before my property taxes went down. But as we recovered, it seems like every year they were Johnny on the spot with increasing those taxes and the value of the house. One of the other comments I want to touch on was earlier, the question was asked about the Second Amendment resolution that you guys passed. And if it doesn't have the power of law, what good is it? I feel very strongly that as individuals, you have a right to participate or not participate, but as county commissioners, you didn't have any obligation to do that, to pass that resolution. But again, also as county commissioners, taking a stand, a public stand about your feelings about the Second Amendment also encourages other people to recognize and to appreciate where you stand on the issue. It doesn't matter if it's the county sheriff or if it's the individuals in the county, they know where you stand and what you believe, and that you support the Constitution as it was written, not necessarily as everybody wants to read it today and interpret it in a different way. So I do appreciate the fact that you took a public stand, and for what that resolution says and does. I believe it was a voice in the wilderness, if you will, that you stood up and took a position, and thank you for it.
Any other questions, comments? As always, our discussions have been very useful, very good, informative. I learned something from Tim today, so thank you.
Might step in on the property tax thing a little bit, because when I started looking at that, I'm always looking at ways, no matter how small, to try and give some money back. And so I looked at, the way we calculate, as Commissioner Weber pointed out, is pretty strict, the way the state codifies it and says you have to do it. It's always one of my gripes, obviously, is the state is always micromanaging the counties and they want to do more and more, but it's pretty strict in how they have us look at property taxes. And you can go to the board and get it relieved, but if there was an audit and the state came down, they didn't agree with that, they could come to you and say, no, you owe us some back taxes. So it's kind of well, in my view, it's a pretty disgusting process, but yeah.
just really quick, I went to the town hall on on Saturday, and I learned this, Jim Walsh pointed this out. The way our state does the taxes is they make their budget and then they set the taxes.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
they
kind of,
decide how much they want to spend and then they know how much to charge you.
exactly.
Instead of setting the tax at reasonable and then seeing how much they have
Work
to
within a
spend.
budget. They just willy-nilly make up a budget and then start charging you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the one thing I didn't know about how the process was, and I was pretty surprised by that.
One of the things that Representative Orcutt has almost always mentions when he talks about taxes, he said that there are alternative forms of taxes that the state of Washington can use. But the current system, as convoluted as it is, always generates more money than the previous year. There's never been a decline. Even when we have recessions, there's something about the diversity of the tax code, the different kinds of taxes that we have that always generates more money, and then they adjust the budget to spend whatever money they collect. So it is interesting. I've always been amazed that even though there's a river that separates us, Oregon and Washington kind of have very different approaches to taxes. They have property taxes that are twice what ours are, but they have an income tax, but you can't get them to adopt a sales tax. And you can't get us to adopt an income tax. They have to do kind of behind the scenes things like capital gains tax, I guess, apparently, but we have a sales tax. So that's adjustable, and that's what they usually use to fill in the gap, but they don't need to. Like Representative Orcutt says, the system already generates more money from us. So I don't know what the answer is. Any other questions or comments? I don't see any hands raised. I don't think. All right. Well, thank you again. I think we are done for today. This meeting is adjourned.
Please get the clock.